Last night, we promised you an interview with another source close to these officers now under arrest, one who has actually been working with them for years. Tonight in a Kelly File exclusive, a Baltimore cop tells us the officer's side of this story. He asked us to call him Mike, and we agreed for his safety to disguise his identity. Mike, thank you very much for being here. And so you know all 6 of the officers involved in this case. How do you know them?
I actually work with all of them.
How many of them have you spoken with since the incident with Freddie Gray?
I've spoken with 2 of them for actually a pretty lengthy conversation.
And they relayed to you their take on what happened with Freddie Gray in that van?
They did.
All right, let's first start with whether they told you that they believe he was injured outside of the van or inside the van.
So none of them actually had any knowledge that he was injured until they got to the station. Freddie is always one of those types where when you go to arrest him on the streets, he always puts up on a show and whatnot. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary to them. And he, like I said, they showed nothing that he was injured until they got to the station.
So the Baltimore PD is very familiar with Freddie Gray. We know he has a long rap sheet, but it sounds like you have familiarity with him too.
I do.
And when you say he puts on a show, what do you mean?
He always acts, extra out there on the streets, and, he tries to make a show, create a disturbance, get people watching what he's doing.
So if he were in that van and shouting or jumping up and down, would that have been unusual?
Absolutely not.
So you're telling me that these officers believed, they're telling you they believed that he was fine until they found out there were 4 stops with the van, until the ultimate stop, the 5th, was at the police station, until they got to the police station, until they got to that last stop, that 5th stop at the police station, and realized that he wasn't?
Yeah, that's correct. Apparently they were saying that he asked for his asthma pump relatively soon, but he was just in a lengthy foot chase, which, wouldn't seem out of the ordinary. But he made no indication that he needed any sort of medical attention or anything.
Now, are these officers who were pursuing him, or are these officers who were inside the van?
As far as what?
That were talking to you, that were explaining what happened?
I was talking to the officers that were actually pursuing him.
Okay, so these are, the guys on the bike, right? Because there were 3 guys on the bike who pursued him.
That's correct.
So did they have any knowledge really of what happened inside the van after they closed up the doors and the one officer drove away with Freddie?
They had no indication at all. The only thing that they told me was that, as soon as they put him inside the van, he started going crazy and, banging his head fairly hard on the side of the wall, trying to get their attention and the people in the neighborhood's attention.
How did they know that it was his head he was banging against the wall of the van as opposed to his elbow or anything else? Could they see him?
They couldn't really. I guess it could have been something different, but you got to figure he was handcuffed behind him, so it really couldn't. I guess it could have been his elbow, but, they were just guessing it was his head.
Okay, and how did they describe it?
They just describe it as a constant, knocking, and, the wagons that we use, it's pretty much a Ford, Econoline van or, a Chevy van, and there's a big, it's like they put a metal box inside of it, so and then there's a divider that runs down the middle, so you have essentially 2 sides to the wagon, one on the left and one on the right, and there's a bench that runs parallel, the long lengthwise of the wagon, so... it is a pretty tight quarters in there, so.
Why wouldn't they have put the leg shackles on him right from the beginning and or buckled him in right from the beginning?
Well, as far as the leg shackles go, it's not uncommon a lot of times where, especially in the city, people are always don't snitch, stitches, or snitches get stitches and that type of thing out there. So, people put on a show to make it seem as if they're not going to work with the police. So a lot of times when they're around their friends and whatnot, they're going to put on that show. But as soon as you get them isolated, put them in a vehicle, get them out of that situation, they usually, for the most part, calm down. So the officers didn't probably put the shackles on him because they're figuring that he's going to calm down once they get him in the wagon. And as far as the seatbelt, I mean, I guess per policy you're supposed to put the seatbelt on, but it's unsafe for the officer to actually get inside of the wagon to put the seatbelt on of a suspect that's, being combative, being, very aggressive, because there's just the potential that the officer's going to get injured by doing that. You're in such close quarters, the officer could get spit at, their ear bitten, just different things that would make them not want to get up in that close quarters with someone that's being combative.
So when the passenger is being compliant, normally would the protocol be to put the seatbelt on, but when he's not being compliant, normally would it be you don't?
Well, the protocol is, one way you're supposed to put the seatbelt on. But, for the most part, like I said, if they're compliant, the seatbelt's going on them because there's really no, there's always, I guess, a potential danger to the officer, but the officer has a little bit more comfort getting inside of the back of the wagon in order to put the seatbelt on.
In practice,
when you got somebody that's going crazy,
it doesn't always happen. Now, those officers maintain that when Freddie Gray went into that van, he was walking of his own accord, because I understand that there's been a leaked medical examiner's report that suggests Freddie Gray's injury that led to his death occurred inside the van. That was the conclusion we've heard so far, at least reportedly from the medical examiner. And some people on the streets of Baltimore have rejected that based on the limited snippets of videotape they've seen, saying he wasn't using his legs before getting in the van. Now, we've seen videotape where he was standing and appears to be stepping into the van, which would contradict that challenge. But what did these officers tell you?
Exactly. And it's one of those things where he was putting on the show as they were taking him to the van, but the video shows clear evidence that he was standing and he got into the van on his own accord. He wasn't thrown into the van. He wasn't, brutally placed into the van. He got into the van on his own accord. And, just set something straight about Freddie himself. Going back to the snitches get stitches things, Freddie was one of those ones where a lot of times he would put on that show on the streets, but you'd bring him in the station, and he was a great witness. He helped the department solve many crimes and type of different acts of violence. So it wasn't uncommon for Freddie to do that type of thing and then go into the station.
That's interesting. That's new information I had not yet heard. According to these officers, was there any altercation between them at all and Freddie, other than, placing the suspect under arrest in terms of, did they hit him?
Absolutely not. They told me that, they chased him because he ran, and the place that he ran from, it is a place where he's commonly been locked up for selling drugs out of that alley. It wouldn't surprise me that the reason that he ran was he was probably dirty in that alley. He was probably selling drugs. And at no time did they say they used any use of force.
Did they say why they arrested him in the first place? Because they've come under criticism saying, well, they looked at him, they said he looked at them, and then he ran. There's no crime against doing that. If that happened between me and a police officer, he wouldn't have the right to place me under arrest, even if he then found a switchblade on me, which was the second part of the story.
Correct. And one thing that they're taught is unprovoked flight. He ran, which at that point, unprovoked. The police didn't, throw rocks at him. The police didn't, threaten him in any sort of manner. When Freddie saw the police, he ran, which is unprovoked flight. So the officers have every right to pursue him to find out why he was running for. It just so happens that when they got to him, he had a switchblade on. Whether that's the reason he ran, I don't know. He could have had drugs. And it's not an uncommon thing that when, the people that are running, if the dealers that are running, if they throw drugs, if you can't find them, we can't charge them just because they ran. We have to have some sort of crime.
Right. So what was he being charged with here?
he was charged with a switchblade, I guess, is what they ended up charging with him. But it doesn't mean, I mean, my personal guess to this, and this is just me speculating, is that he was he was distributing narcotics in that alley.
Mm-hmm. And was he known to do that in this particular area?
Oh yes, that's where he's been locked up numerous times, in that exact alley that he began running from, to be locked up for distributing narcotics.
Breaking tonight, we are back with our exclusive interview. A Baltimore police officer who has worked for years with the 6 officers in the Freddie Gray case and who has spoken with the officers, now charged with his death. Watch. I want to talk to you about what, may have happened to Freddie in that van. The emerging theory by some who are defending some of these cops is that he did this to himself, that something happened inside of that van that he did this to himself, whether it was intentional or not. And then others say, really, you want us to believe he severed his own spinal cord, accidentally or on purpose? Do you believe that is possible?
You know what, and I think it is possible that he could have done it to himself just because of his irrational behavior and how he was flailing around. And number 2, I know the person that was driving that wagon that day, and, that officer would not absolutely go above and beyond and, actually swerve that wagon in a reckless manner in order to, attempt to fling him out of the seat or, throw him around.
How can you be sure?
It's just something that officer wouldn't do. Just working with the officer. I mean, he's one of those types where he's not going to go, above and beyond, and he just doesn't get angry like that. He doesn't let people bother him, and, I've worked with him, and it's not something he would do.
Why do you think he didn't disclose that second stop that came out yesterday? About, the van had stopped a few times, but they didn't disclose a second stop. It was only determined when they reviewed some surveillance video and they saw it. By the way, apparently they saw that Freddie Gray was alert and talking on that at that second stop. But why would he not have disclosed it? Many have found that suspicious.
I don't think that's something that he didn't disclose, because, from the day that the incident happened, he told me that. I'm sure he disclosed it to the department. I'm guessing that it's just something that they didn't release until now.
Was there any altercation at all between the driver of the van or any other officer and Freddie Gray on any of the stops, according to the cops?
According to what I'm told, absolutely not. No.
So when they saw him on all these stops, was he injured? Was it just a shock to open up at the police station and see that he was catastrophically injured?
It was. At every stop that they had, Freddie was talking, acting still irate and normal. And, it is a very short distance to go from where they picked up that second prisoner into the station. It is a short distance. And, it's like the other suspect, the prisoner that was in the back of the wagon with him on the opposite side, said he was still banging his head around at that point.
Do you believe that, well, first of all, let me back up. How do you know this? Because if you've only spoken to the 2 cops who were on the bicycles and didn't go along with the van, then how do they know that there was no altercation that happened at any one of the stops and what condition Freddie was in along those stops?
I spoke with the officer that was driving the wagon as well.
Okay.
I spoke with 3 of the involved officers.
And they maintained that he was fine on all of the stops, and then it wasn't until they got to the police station that they saw he was so badly injured.
That's correct.
That's stunning. Today, the second prisoner came out and said, well, that Washington Post report that suggested I heard him banging his head and I thought he was trying to intentionally injure himself. Washington Post had cited a police affidavit in support of that. He said, that's not true. I just heard some banging and I didn't know what it was. What do you make of that attempted, walking back of the Washington Post report by the second prisoner?
Yeah. I think that's him trying to cover up his reputation on the streets, with especially the high profile that this case has, started to take on. I think that's him trying to, save himself on the streets and possible retaliation by other, individuals on the streets. Like I said, snitches get stitches in Baltimore, and it's something that it's very rare that you have these individuals that are involved in crime and getting arrested work with the police. So for the media to release that, this is what he said, I think he's trying to say, wait a minute, I wasn't working with the police. This is what I said, and misconstruing.
Do you know, Mike, is there any GPS or video or anything attached to this van that might help authorities figure out for themselves what happened?
So as far as my knowledge, there is no GPS to any of our patrol vehicles. And the van itself, it was a newer model of the wagon that we use. And there was originally, when the vehicle was purchased and brand new, there was a in-vehicle camera system, but it didn't record. It was just strictly for the driver of the van to see what's going on in the back of the wagon. And he could also hear audio, but that equipment's been broken for some number of years now.
Nobody was with the officer driving the van, right? He was alone?
That's correct.
Did another officer meet him at any one of those stops? There were reports that one or two may have.
Well, when they pull over the first time to put the leg irons, there was obviously more individuals there to help place them into the restraints. And then there was also another officer that did meet him at that second stop. One of the officers that is suspended right now as well. And then obviously there was the officers that had the third person arrested when he was put in. So there was an officer at every stop.
Okay. And did any of them ever enter the van, to your knowledge?
I'm not sure about that.
Do you know if the second prisoner was seatbelted in?
I'm not sure about that, to be honest.
How did they describe the condition of Freddie Gray when they saw him at the police station, when they realized he had been hurt?
So apparently when they got to the police station and they opened up the door, they saw him laying on the ground. And, they were calling his name, trying to see if he was, whether he was just playing or what was up. And at some point, an officer entered the back of the wagon to see why he wasn't responding, which is when they found out he was unresponsive.
Did they describe their reaction at that moment?
It's when they immediately called for an ambulance, and they were just shocked that something could happen like this.
What are they going through now?
They're a great group of officers, and they have hearts of gold, and the one I know is personally taking it extremely difficult.
Do they have
to
families?
The point where he wants to. Oh yeah, they do, and it's affecting their entire families too. And the one I know, he wants to move and change total career fields in general, just because the way that the department has left them out to dry.
Do you feel that? Do they feel like the department has hung them out to dry? In part 3 of our interview, I ask Mike about the Baltimore mayor and what is likely to happen next as the Baltimore PD deals with what their union leader is calling a rush to judgment. Do you feel that? Do they feel like the department has hung them out to dry?
They do, and you know what? I think that's the whole feel of the entire department at this point. The command staff that has recently came in from Oakland and California has just been, from the officer's standpoint, they feel as if, the officers are guilty until proven innocent. And this command staff doesn't ever go to bat for them. As soon as an accusation is made, they're immediately on the public side. And that's the issue that a lot of officers have, is even once the officers aren't cleared, a lot of times the command doesn't go and actually clear it up to the public. So this whole time, the public is still thinking that they did this, even though, it's something that they didn't do. And this has happened on numerous occasions. And the feel of the department at this point is the current command is out to get everybody.
When you say the command, help us, those of us who are not in the Baltimore PD, do you mean Commissioner Batts? Who do you mean?
Commissioner Batts and Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner Rodriguez, who is no longer with the agency.
How about the mayor? What do you make of her reaction to all of this?
I think it's a disgrace in how, she's left, I think she's left the police department and the officers out to dry as well. It's just the way that she's handled this whole situation, and claiming she's going to get justice for Freddie and all this stuff. Especially, I'm sure that she's informed of the facts that are being found before the public, and I'm sure she's right along with this investigation. And to still continue and go out there and in a sense betray the officers and say you're going to get justice. I mean, it's a tragic event what happened to them, but I think at some point the record needs to be set straight, and these officers need to, be in a sense taken down. And they didn't do anything wrong.
So you're saying you believe she knows, based on the evidence that's been presented to her, that these cops did nothing wrong, and yet she's going out there, as we've played for the audience, saying we're going to get justice for Freddie Gray. Justice for Freddie Gray. Not just justice, not justice for all involved, but justice for Freddie Gray, presuming, obviously, that he is the wronged party, the victim, and the only victim here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only presuming that, as the mayor, I'm sure she is having an interaction with the police commissioner daily, and I'm sure that information's getting passed that's not being passed to the public. So I can only assume that, she does know more about this investigation than we do, and just, for her to go out and proclaim that she wants justice for Freddie Gray, and, what about the officers that, the community is hanging to dry, and her and the command staff, Commissioner Batts, that are just hanging out to dry, and they're not sticking up for these officers, and it's affecting them as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the response in Baltimore, and what were your instructions on Monday night? First of all, were you surprised that the mayor did not institute a curfew on Monday night when we'd seen protests all day?
Oh, absolutely, and this goes back from Monday night, starting with the incidents that occurred in Ferguson. There were still localized protests going on, in reference to the Ferguson and stuff. And it was nothing like what's going on with Baltimore, but they were peaceful, but I mean, it started then. At that point, they were told, we were given specific instructions: don't arrest anybody, don't, if they spit at you, if they're doing things to you, you need to be pulled off the line if you're going to lose your cool. But we're not making an arrest. We're going to let them destroy property. We're going to let them, do these different, these, in a sense, minor crimes, and we're not going to do anything about it.
Who said that?
And it started, that was orders from, whoever had roll call at the time, which was most likely, at the time, it was a lieutenant colonel or above. So it was a higher ranking official. In the previous, the first set of protests, I didn't. But, when this one started happening, the localized event of Freddie Gray that happened in Baltimore, it was outrageous, things being thrown at officers. All these officers were getting injured, but they didn't want us to do anything, and the department was extremely unprepared.
What were you guys saying to one another? We watched the videotape we watched it live when people were throwing cement bricks at the police and the firefighters who are there to try to protect the community. Several officers, over 100, wound up getting injured. Several wound up going to the hospital. What were you saying to one another in the middle of it?
We all felt like we were being ragdolls at that point. We were, the department didn't want us to, throw things. They didn't want us to do anything. We were getting these objects thrown at us, and it was just ridiculous. It was to the point where, we were almost just going to do what we had to do to keep ourselves safe. And I remember specifically, I don't recall what day it was, whether it was Saturday or Monday, but I remember Commissioner Batts specifically briefing us on it, and it was something, I'm sorry, let's face it, we're in the midst of a riot, and he's worried about appearance in a sense. He was telling officers to, take off their black gloves, take off this because we look too aggressive. Well, sometimes I guess if we would maybe just get that aggressiveness at the beginning and we didn't let it get to the point, as soon as one person started throwing rocks at us, we should have arrested them right there, and it would set the precedence that if you throw rocks at the police, if you assault the police, you're going to go to jail. But instead, that first night when the rocks started being thrown, nowhere to the scale they were thrown at us on Monday.
What?
But, when they started throwing them, they should have been dealt with at that point.
What do you make of the mayor coming out? Originally, she, the president, the city council, the police commissioner, too, called these people who were rioting and committing crimes thugs. And then the mayor got some pressure, apparently, because she came out on Twitter and said, she took it back and said, really, they're just misguided young people who need our support. Your thoughts on that?
It's, what? They are thugs. And unfortunately, it is a group of younger individuals, for the most part, that are committing these crimes and that are, we're doing this. And, let's all admit, they probably do need guidance in their life. But, when the adults are acting like children, you can't have a child raising a child.
Do you feel like you are getting support?
From the mayor?
Right.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think she's shown her stance, and I think she's shown that it's political for her. I mean, the way that she's putting the police, hanging them at this point and hanging them out to dry, I think she's shown that it's a political game. And, when you have a large majority of these individuals that are voting for her, she's obviously going to say what they want to hear in order to get reelected.
What is the race of the 6 officers involved in this case?
It's actually a mix of white and black officers.
So it's not all white?
That's correct.
Do you know whether anybody has taken that into consideration? I mean, in so many of these cases, it's been a white officer and a black defendant, and we've been told that that's the problem, that these police forces are too white and they're too trigger-happy when they're going after black defendants.
That's just something that they're going to say because, they can never admit that, it was their doing that got them arrested. They can never take responsibility for their actions. It's always going to be a race game. And you know what? The Baltimore Police Department is an extremely diverse department, especially, all the way from the officers all the way up to the command staff. It's an extremely diverse department. So it's something that we hear every day is, you're only giving me a ticket because I'm black. You're only doing this. And it's an easy way out instead of taking responsibility.
So for the viewers who are out there now, Mike, thinking to themselves, this is a clear cut of police brutality. The guy went into the van fine. He emerged from the van while in police custody with a broken neck and then died. What do you want them to take away?
I want them to, before they, give these officers the same rights that every other citizen has. They're not guilty until they're proven guilty. And, that's just the thing that I would like them to take. Wait till they know the facts before they truly judge these officers.
Do you have any beef with the department? Have you been disciplined in any way or had any sort of... have you been disciplined in any way at the department?
I have not.
So you have a clean record?
I do.
Describe for us, if you would, what it is like to be a police officer right now in Baltimore under the stress and the pressures that we have seen this week.
You know what? At this point, everyone's saying, when you go back, when we finally do resume regular patrol responsibilities and that type of thing, at this point, we've seen where the mayor is, we've seen where the commissioner is, we've seen whose side they're on. It's going to take a serious act of violence. It's going to take a serious offense for these officers to go out and arrest people. You're not going to see officers being as proactive because the department has shown whose side they're on. They're not going to stand up for these officers when, incidents like this come down. Let's face it, police work is not a pretty subject. It's not going to be a pretty picture. There's going to be things that, just look bad, and it's just the nature of the beast. But I don't think you're going to see the officers going out there being as proactive as they were before.
Wow. Mike, stay safe. Thank you for being on with us, and all the best to you.
Thank you.